Lesson 6 is here for Financial Sobriety School. Welcome back for today's lesson. Today, we're going to talk about if sobriety actually means more money. Because a lot of the time, and sobriety can mean a few different things, a lot of people like to use the term recovery. I like the term sobriety. That's what I grew up with in my home. That's what I really resonate with myself. But a lot of people also like the term recovering because the word, with the addiction part doesn't really resonate, which is totally great. The beautiful thing about this is we get to choose what works for us. But once we go into recovery or sobriety from something, we start to think about, okay, well, if I stop drinking or if I stop doing such and such, if I stop, doing the thing that you are in recovery or in sobriety from, how does that start to work financially for you? And a lot of people, when they first stop drinking, is and that's kind of my story when it comes to what I like to share, of course, is, as you've heard before, that when I got sober from drinking alcohol, then I started to spend money even more than I was doing before. So spending started to take over. But these days, there's a lot of different tools that are available to us. So, foundation number two within the Financial Sobriety School, the second foundation is financial sobriety systems or tools that we use to be able to work on our financial sobriety. And one of those tools that I really, really love to let people know about is there's certain apps that you can get. Unfortunately, here in Canada, there's not a lot. But within the states and around the world, have access to a lot more in regards to counting your sober days or the days that you're in recovery. And you put in the information on what it was that you averaged, the average that you would spend on your addiction or drug of choice recovery. And so, for example, for myself, it would have been that I was buying and drinking probably about a bottle of wine an evening. And with that, it then says, okay, how much were you spending on that? And then it starts to calculate how much you've saved within your time period of your days of counting your sobriety or your recovery. What I will say to this though is that just be a little bit careful because yes, it gives you that information, but there's also that point where all of a sudden you have a look at it and that guilt and that shame starts to come in of, but I don't have that $2,000 it says that I saved because I'm in sobriety or recovery. I actually don't have that. And then, oh my goodness, where did that go? And so we don't want to start going down that shame spiral of, oh my goodness, now I'm doing something bad. And that's where the narrative really starts to come in about our money, is that the narrative automatically goes to, oh my goodness, I'm doing something wrong. Oh, I should have been doing this. So that's why I wanted to talk about that in today's lesson, because I think that there is a real expectation sometimes of, if I stop taking part in, for example, drinking, that I won't be spending as much money, or even like cigarettes. Like I know that's a really big one when you stop smoking cigarettes or vaping or whatever you're doing, because there's such a high cost to that as well. And then how much will you be saving each week? But you actually don't have that saved. Again, there's that expectation of, oh, I stopped doing this, so I quote unquote should have this. And there is a balance to be found in that. And as you may have noticed a theme happening in Financial Sobriety School, I talk a lot about balance. I talk a lot about making sure that we're not going from one extreme to the other, which is very normal, but how can we stop, really going from those extremes? And when it comes to the money part, when you enter recovery or sobriety, that's where this is really, really key, because this is where a lot of times, drinking alcohol, cigarettes, all of that are coping mechanisms, right? Those are coping mechanisms to get things through, things that you feel are hard, things that you're trying to escape from, things that you're trying to numb out on. That's where we are reaching outside of ourselves. So when we take one of those things away, a lot of times we're just starting to reach for something else. It's like, okay, I don't have this. What can I do now? What can I reach for? What can I buy? So a lot of times there's food, and you're spending a lot more on food. You're spending a lot more on eating out. You are spending more on clothes, getaways, things like that. So yes, you aren't spending the money on what you're in recovery from, but there's also a time period where there has to be a little bit of grace, leniency, permission to be able to maybe purchase other things that you wouldn't usually be doing, or really trying to by maybe it's something like getting money coaching or getting a recovery coach or doing some sort of recovery program, and that's going to cost money. I know when it comes down to it, when people get sober from alcohol, drugs, whatever, and they go to a treatment center, and that guilt and that shame about how much money that costs, that's a really big example of then, like, what do you do then, right? But there's also, when it comes to that, if you're doing it on your own, of just trying to stay sober. When I start working with people that are, newer to recovery or sobriety, what I always tell them, we are, yes, working on our money, but at the same time, the main thing that you have to make sure that you're doing is staying sober. Working your sobriety, working so that you're not picking up that drug of choice is the most important thing. And sometimes that might be going to a drive-through and picking up a sundae or some fries and pop, right? Like, one of those things that feels comforting, but being really, really aware of it, because that awareness is really key. And because we can get lost and caught up in that really, really quickly, like I did with my spending. And I hear it again, common all the time, is that food piece. So keeping an awareness on it. That's why I wanted to talk about that today, because I don't think it's realistic for you to, quit drinking, get sober, and being like, "Okay, I'm going to be perfect with my money, and every ounce that I used to spend on alcohol, I'm going to now start to save. And when I look at my sober counter, I'm going to have that 200 or $2,000 that my counter says I should have." Is that realistic? I don't think so. So that's where it's nice to have those counters, but at the same time, they can be quite shame-inducing that way. But some people also find counting days and all of that really, really supportive when they first enter sobriety. I know myself, I did. So using those are great, but really kind of taking that amount that you've saved and how much you, quote unquote, again, should have, take that with a grain of salt, right? Like, just really be aware of, actually, this is where I'm putting that money right now, because that's what's best for me right now. And you might actually say that's not even what's best for you, but that's just what you're reaching for right now, just to stay sober. And just acknowledging and honoring that that's might be what's happening for you. There's that flip side, and what I was talking about with when you're getting sober and a treatment center or a recovery program of some sort that you're taking part in, that costs a lot. Or myself, when I was active in my drinking addiction, I was actually like putting all of what I was buying alcohol wise mostly on credit cards. There wasn't a lot of my own money that was being spent on that, because I was overspending in life anyways, let alone when it came to the fancy alcohol. There's a lot of air quotes happening today. But and that was the thing, like, and near the end of my, what I like to refer to as my drinking career, I started to buy cheaper wine. Because I started going through it quicker. And so that's where, even though it was cheaper, the cost was still going up because I was buying more of it. And so a lot of times when we enter sobriety, we are actually in a lot of debt because of the patterns and behaviors we had when we were active in our addiction. And that's a really big piece of acceptance, forgiveness for yourself, and really cementing and solidifying for yourself why you've made the decision you have to stop that behavior of your drug of choice. Because again, you didn't have the money for it. You've probably quit because it was, negatively affecting your life in so many ways. And one of those ways being financially. And there's a lot of times too where I hear a lot of stories of people who did a lot of online shopping when they were active on substances or alcohol. And it would be, online shopping a lot and not really knowing what they were buying. And the next thing they know, things are showing up that they don't even remember buying. And then that debt starts to come up of having to start to pay that stuff off. And that's a hard part because then you are entering a life of sobriety and the things and cleaning up. And I'll say what I felt. It felt like I was cleaning up wreckage for years. It felt like there was so much wreckage that came with my sobriety that it made sobriety hard at times. And it was things like, oh my goodness, I have such a big credit card balance. Oh my goodness, I can't believe that I spent that much money on that stuff. And so much regret, so much shame, so much guilt, and trying to work through that. And that's exactly why I want to talk about it today, because there is so much of that people just leave as a secret. They leave that hidden and it starts to really physically affect them because all of that is living in your body, all of those feelings, and you don't know what to do with it. And even simply just starting with a journal prompt of this is what I regret doing with my money when I was active in my addiction. What am I feeling right now about my money? And how did my addiction affect my money? And really getting clear on that to be able to then make that even more, again, being able to be solidified in your sobriety of that's why I'm not doing that anymore. You may not come out of being first in your sobriety with that money that you feel like you're going to save because you're not taking part in that anymore. Sometimes that is not going to happen. And that is okay. That is completely normal. You have to give yourself some room. You have to give yourself some space to navigate sobriety and recovery and start to comfort yourself some ways with maybe things that aren't exactly great for you, but there's some harm reduction part of that, right? That at least you're not reaching for your drug of choice. So what, you got a sundae or a milkshake from Dairy Queen and inhaled it and it actually felt good. But at the same time, there's that awareness of we want to make sure that there isn't a daily trip to Dairy Queen for the next 2 years of inhaling that sundae, right? There's sometimes some short-term things that happen when you first enter your recovery to be able to just get through some days. Right? Books are a really big thing that I find that us in recovery reach for a lot of, as I have a lot of books myself. And, I'm very proud that I use these books all the time within my money coaching, but there's often people have piles and piles of books because they reach for it thinking, oh, if I actually get this book on fighting sugar cravings during just fighting sugar cravings, quitting sugar, that means that that's what's going to happen for me. And again, those are things that might start to kind of put some band-aids on stuff. But it's really starting to dig in a little bit deeper in the work as time goes on so that you can start to make that space to start to look at your money. You can start to open that space to start to do the work on, again, that acceptance, that forgiveness of what's happened in the past for you. Just because you are reaching and going into sobriety from a drug of choice does not mean that there's an expectation that you're going to start to save a bunch of money. The most important piece for you right now, if this is where you are right this second, is that you're just making sure that you're staying sober right now and giving yourself permission to take part in some things that are comforting for you and that help support you. And even those moments of things that it might not be what's supporting you and what's best for you, but it actually feels comfortable in that moment. And it makes sure that you're not reaching for that other thing. This is where balance really starts to come in, being aware of what you're doing. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation, because I think that then there starts to be the shame of what we're reaching for when we're trying to achieve sobriety from alcohol, drugs, drug of choice. I hope that this little pep talk helps support you for lesson 6. Part of the foundation, number 2, within Financial Sobriety School of financial sobriety systems, tools. That's one of those tools, is to start to give yourself permission and starting to create balance and awareness. Thank you so much for coming to the lesson today, lesson 6. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next week for lesson 7. Bye.